Hello, I'm David Speers. Welcome to this special edition of PM Agenda, coming to you from the ALP conference in Sydney. Coming up on the show, we'll be talking to Foreign Minister Stephen Smith. First to the final and easily most exciting day of what has been an otherwise stage-managed and almost soporific Labor conference here in Sydney. Delegates have been carefully following the script over the last 3 days and showing no signs of triumphalism or hubris. They have been keeping to the carefully arranged debates and discussions that were already sorted well before they arrived here at Darling Harbour. But today they were finally given a chance to show a bit of emotion, show a bit of passion, because one of Labor's favourite sons was given a rare honour. Bob Hawke was awarded life membership of the ALP. Gough and Margaret Whitlam are the only others to share this honour. The former Prime Minister, who turns 80 in December, went straight for the victory salute before Kevin Rudd grabbed his hand. The two men are the most popular Prime Ministers in opinion poll history, but the silver bodgie holds the mantle as the most prolific election winner. There were the trademark tears as Hawke reflected on his years in the Labor movement as ACTU President and Prime Minister, and he wasn't shy in talking up his achievements.
The Labor movement and the ALP has been an enduring love of my life. I say that in no tacky, emotional sense. It has been an enduring love of my life. I thank literally millions of people like yourselves, hard-working members of the branches and the trade unions, who for so many years have given me sustenance, support, inspiration and the opportunity of leadership. And I thank you for this great and cherished honour that you've presented to me, Kevin. And I want to say to you, delegates, that you'll best perpetuate that honour that you've done me if you commit yourself once again to the full support and re-election of Kevin Rudd and his government, who have already done a magnificent job as far as putting Australia relatively in one of the best economic positions in the world today.
And there is, of course, a fundamental difference between these two Labor leaders. As you heard there, Bob Hawke talked about his genuine and enduring love, his lifelong love for the Labor Party. Kevin Rudd, on the other hand, is not a creature of the Labor Party and certainly not a creature of the union movement. But he does genuinely respect and admire his predecessor and no doubt hopes to repeat his longevity in office. And the Prime Minister, the current occupant of the Lodge, was generous as he reflected on Bob Hawke's legacy and larrikinism.
Here we had in this great Labor leader, this great Labor Prime Minister, a man who saw the challenge as being to unify the nation, and he did so. Remember the summits that brought the nation together around a new reform agenda for the future. Summits that entrenched the ideas of reconciliation, of recovery and of reconstruction, bringing the nation together as only R.J. Hawke could. Himself a great bridge between all sides of politics, between all parts of the economy and all parts of our nation. And as only as Hawke could. Hawke, the larrikin, the lovable larrikin. Hawke, none of us will forget his marvellous advice to all employers on the morning after the America's Cup win. Summed up, I believe, succinctly for all times. Hawke, the mad keen punter. Hawke, the life and soul of the party, and not just our party.
There was plenty of love in the air inside the conference, and there was plenty of love in the air outside as well, just not the type Kevin Rudd approves of. Thousands of protesters marched through Darling Harbour to this conference, protesting over the government's continued refusal to allow gay marriage. This was debated here at the conference today, but still no breakthrough, and thousands of people outside on this sunny winter's day at Darling Harbour staged a mass wedding ceremony for same-sex couples, an illegal one, they acknowledged, given there has been no change in the law. Inside the conference, there was a torturous negotiation process over this that lasted throughout the night, but Still, no development good enough for those who wanted gay marriage. They did reach a compromise, though, which will see the Labor Party push for nationally consistent laws recognising same-sex relationships, but not allowing gay marriage or civil unions or anything that replicates a marriage. Here were the main proponents of this argument on both sides happy enough with the compromise they'd reached.
Those great political philosophers Jagger and Richards said, sometimes you can't always get what you want, but you get what you need. The resolution before this conference provides the latter. It is certainly not my ideal position. I have a view that my relationship, because I happen to be heterosexual, is not undermined by someone else's relationship because it is homosexual.
The Prime Minister has made it clear that a Labor government will not support any form of recognition of relationships that undermines marriage, and indeed he recently said, when asked about that, when it comes to civil unions, as is described, civil unions mean the effective amendment of the Marriage Act, and that is something that we don't support.
And this was the issue that perhaps more than any others at this three-day conference saw a genuine split and a difficult path to compromise. But as we saw there, even on this issue, we did see a compromise, and the strongest proponents of legalising gay marriage weren't going to tip a bucket on the Prime Minister.
Anthony Albanese said this would be unstoppable. A senior minister in the ALP said this movement will be unstoppable. It will be unstoppable.
So when do you think it will happen?
I think that people will continue discussions. I think that the Australian Senate, who's currently got a marriage inquiry occurring, which is calling for people to do submissions by the 28th of August, I think that a lot of Australians are going to get involved in this conversation, and I welcome that debate.
And with the conference drawing to a close, there was one further upset, though, that no one had completely expected. Some gate crashes. They were official observers, it's understood, of the conference, managed to make it onto the conference floor to stage a silent protest as the climate change debate finally commenced in the dying hours of the conference, as the Climate Change Minister, Penny Wong, defended defiantly the government's policy on an emissions trading scheme. A dozen or more protesters with gaffer-taped mouths signalled their anger over the amount of compensation and support going to industry as part of this scheme, and in particular the coal industry. But the Minister pressed on with her argument.
We in this party will be proud of what we are doing on climate change, because for the first time in this nation's history, we have brought environmental policy on climate change to the heart of government. And there will be naysayers and there will be those who criticise, but we in this government and this party will stand firm against those who speak fear and those who are negative, and we will build a brighter future for Australia, a low-carbon future that will ensure jobs and ensure that our children and their children enjoy the environment that we inherited and better.
Welcome back to PM Agenda. As we saw earlier, the former Prime Minister Bob Hawke was awarded the rare honour of life membership of the ALP on the final day of the Labor Party's conference here in Sydney at Darling Harbour. But it seems time can heal most wounds, because there was a time when Labor didn't want Bob Hawke as their leader any longer, and someone who was there at the time working with Paul Keating, the man who tore him down and became Prime Minister, is the current Foreign Minister, Stephen Smith, and we spoke earlier. Stephen Smith, thanks for your time. Bob Hawke's big day at the ALP conference today. What do you remember about his time as Prime Minister?
Well, I think the sweep of the reforms, the sweep of history, is a terrific, if you like, recognition for Bob's grand career. And it's still going, because I'm sure he'll stump up at the next federal election as well. But I think the economic reforms, and also he did make the point about the foreign policy and international reforms that Labor and his government were associated with.
You were, of course, working for Paul Keating at the time that he tore down Bob Hawke as leader, as Prime Minister. Was that a difficult thing to do?
Well, the first thing I should say is Hawke's forgiven me for my role in that. That's the most important thing.
What was your role in that?
Well, I was on Mr Keating's staff, so guilt by association.
Yeah. But
it's always difficult when a party's got to make a judgment about whether the time's come for a leader to go or not. And when you're dealing with the most successful Labor leader, the most successful Labor Prime Minister, doubly difficult. It was a difficult decision for the party, but we dealt with it, worked our way through it. Mr Keating won the 1993 election, and in his own right, a series of substantial reforms that we're proud of from his time
obviously,
as well.
Some wounds are pretty difficult to heal. Paul Keating not here today. Not surprisingly, but it's obviously still a fairly raw issue, isn't it?
No, I think a lot of the rawness has gone, certainly between Bob and Paul. And as I say, sort of half tongue-in-cheek, Hawke's forgiven me. He's forgiven a lot of people.
Would it have been nice to see Paul Keating here today, though, for this special moment?
Well, that's a matter for Paul. And in the past, we've given special recognition to Paul, and in the future, we certainly don't rule that out. But in terms of national life memberships, we've now got 3, Gough and Margaret Whitlam and Hawke, and of course they're all richly deserved. But I think one of the spirits or the sentiments today was just a great tribute by the conference for a remarkable career and a remarkable contribution. But I think you'd find a number of delegates, some of the older ones, even older than me, who in earlier years when Bob was chair of the ACTU, trying to get into Parliament, and then leader of the opposition and Prime Minister, who weren't necessarily unambiguously lacking in criticism of his time. So in politics, this always occurs, where as you go through, people are critical of what you've done or haven't done.
And the rose-coloured glasses go on.
A policy decision here, a policy decision there. But at the end of a career, people make a judgment about what was the nature and substance of your contribution. And in Hawke's case, of course, a substantial contribution. And on that basis, is correctly described as not just a great Labor politician or a great Labor Prime Minister, he's truly a great Australian, and that's recognised.
The other big issue at the conference today has been gay marriage. It doesn't seem like there's been much change at all in Labor's position. A big protest has taken place out the front of the conference. Do you think there's been any change at all in Labor's opposition to gay marriage?
Well, there's certainly no change in the government's approach, which is we proceed on the basis of marriage being an act between a man and a woman recognised under the Marriage Act. But the conference resolution does say that we should have a look at whether there's some prospect of national consistency in recognition of long-term committed relationships.
What is the argument against allowing same-sex couples to marry?
Well, because our view is that marriage is between a man and a woman, reflected by the provisions of the Marriage Act.
Why? I mean, as Anthony Albanese said in the conference, it doesn't undermine his heterosexual marriage and relationship to allow a homosexual couple to also marry. It doesn't worry him, it doesn't.
Well, which is one of the arguments which has seen a response, which is we do think, certainly in the first instance, and the Attorney General Robert McClellan has been very strong on this, that just because you have a same-sex couple, they should not in any way be discriminated against. We're absolutely very strong on that, and he's made a range of changes reflecting that. So that's, I think, the starting point.
Why can't they be allowed to marry?
Starting point is no discrimination. Secondly, the argument that Mr Albanese has made, I think, has been in part why the conference has said, let's have a look to see whether some nationally consistent recognition is appropriate. But
do you think it does undermine a heterosexual marriage to allow a homosexual marriage?
Well, the government's view of marriage is it's between a man and a woman. That's reflected by the long-standing provisions of the Commonwealth Marriage Act, and we're not proposing to disturb that.
Let's move on. The conference, as I understand it, there's also been a senior Chinese Communist Party official here as an observer. Have you met with him at all?
Yes, Vice Minister Liu was here. He now heads up what's called the International Department or International Division of the political department in Beijing.
And did you talk about Stern Hu, the Rio Tinto executive?
We had a wide-ranging conversation. It's his predecessor, because he's just started, his predecessor traditionally came to ALP National Conference, so it's not a novel or a new thing. It's essentially the party-to-party
Okay. Did you talk about Stern Hu?
Talked about the relationship, talked about Stern Hu.
No further development there?
No, I just made the same points that I've made to my counterpart last week, Foreign Minister Young. We believe the matter should be dealt with as a consular matter, should be dealt with expeditiously, and it needs to be dealt with expeditiously and managed carefully so that it doesn't detract from the relationship.
There's also reports today that Burma is developing a nuclear weapon. Do you have, this is reported in the Sydney Morning Herald today, do you have evidence yourself? Does the government have any knowledge of this development?
Well, I've certainly seen the report. We don't have any evidence to confirm it one way or the other, but this is an issue which is growing in terms of the international community's concern. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Phuket, Thailand, for the ASEAN-related meetings, one of which was the ASEAN Regional Forum, where we have 25 countries from the region sitting around. It's the premier regional security forum. And the question of North Korea's nuclear role was raised, but in the margins of the conference also the possible relationship between North Korea and Burma was raised. I've previously expressed my concern about that possible development, as have other colleagues, including the Secretary of State. So, Hillary Clinton. We're not in a position to confirm it, but obviously we are very concerned if there was nuclear proliferation from North Korea to Burma. That would be in breach, for example, of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1874, which is the most recent Security Council resolution following on from North Korea's recent underground test.
A couple of other issues. Ivo de Boer, the head of the UN's Climate Change Office, has said that it matters little whether Australia has an emissions trading scheme of its own in place before the Copenhagen summit at the end of the year. Why then is the government rushing to get one in place?
Well, because we think it's important. We don't share that view. We've said consistently that for reasons of
surely he
certainty,
should know. He's the head of the UN Climate Change Office.
But he's not the government of Australia, and we have a different view. And our very strong view, which we've articulated from day one, Prime Minister, Minister Wong, is that for reasons of certainty to business, to give industry certainty so they know what our own legislation will be, but also importantly to give us a good bargaining position. We want to try and get a very good outcome from Copenhagen. And our view, strategically and tactically, is that if we have a settled position reflected by legislation, we can argue to other countries, this is what we've done, you need to match, and if we can all do better, we'll do better.
And just finally, Minister, a young Australian, I understand, has been missing for a few days off Lombok. What's the latest on that?
Well, it's very concerning. I'm not in a position to identify the person concerned, but it's a young man in his mid-20s from my own state of Western Australia. He went scuba diving or snorkelling off Lombok. Hasn't been seen for a couple of days, so we're very worried about that. We're in close consultation with the local authorities. Our officials are giving assistance to the party he was travelling with some close friends. So it is very concerning, but we're doing everything we can together with the local authorities to try and find him, but also giving assistance to the people, the friends he was travelling with.
Okay, Foreign Minister Stephen Smith, thank you.
Thanks very much.
And with us now for a final wrap on this Labor conference as it draws to a close, Kerry-Anne Walsh from the Sun Herald joins us. Kerry-Anne, Bob Hawke, the big event of the day, the life membership for the former Labor Prime Minister. What did you make of the speech that he gave? He was certainly in true Bob Hawke style,
well,
wasn't
it was true Bob Hawke style, that's right. It was long. It was full of self-congratulation, which of course is fantastic because he did achieve a lot. And also he was teary, so really that's...
He ticked all the boxes.
That's kind of ticking all the Bob Hawke boxes, yeah.
And Kevin Rudd was obviously pleased to be there with him and be a part of this today, but it does draw I guess a bit of focus on the similarities and the differences between these two Prime Ministers. This is the longest serving Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister. What sort of similarities and differences do you see?
I don't see a lot of similarities between the two. I think Kevin Rudd is a very different style of leader, a very different style of Prime Minister. Bob Hawke did make his name as somebody who, when he did become Prime Minister, separated himself from his sort of very not divisive so much as aggressive and combatant style as the ACT leader, and became very inclusive.
But was that union background an asset for him at the time?
It was an asset for him at the time, but he made...
Now it's almost a black mark for a Labor wannabe, isn't it?
Yeah, Yeah, that's right. But he ran his cabinet. He was the first one to really formalise the factional system, and he worked out he was instrumental, along with Bill Hayden, his predecessor, in working out a real accord with the union movement.
And we were talking the other day about that first Hawke cabinet. It is regarded historically as one of the best first cabinets of any government.
Well, they'd had a lot of practice. They'd had many years in opposition, and they had some fantastic talent on the front bench, and they had this fresh new agenda. They had to have a fresh new agenda. I mean, the terrible destruction that was wrought after the 1975 Gough Whitlam sacking, they'd had 8 years to get their act together, so they did it spectacularly well.
And now Kevin Rudd and Bob Hawke, Kevin Rudd is rivalling Bob Hawke, passing him in some opinion polls as the most popular Labor leader. But it is interesting because they do have very different styles, don't
Completely different styles.
The larrikinism compared to the
there's no larrikinism with Kevin Rudd. There's no sort of, hitting world records, Guinness World Records with his beer drinking skills or anything like that.
But perhaps that's a reflection of how voters have changed, what Australian society has changed, what we want in a Prime Minister.
Well, that's precisely right, and it's also that I think the Labor Party's modernised and changed. Certainly we haven't seen the sort of combative debates that have marked the conferences of old. In fact, I was just talking to a delegate who said this is the first conference he's ever been to where there's been no formal vote on anything, no ballot paper, not even a showing of their...
That's remarkable, isn't it?
It is
really?
remarkable.
Not one... actual vote.
No, not a
Everything.
vote. Everything.
Sorted out.
But sorted out behind the scenes, but also there wasn't that much to be sorted out behind the scenes, because I guess the end of this process is, what does this platform mean to the Labor Party, the modern Labor Party? It used to be that the platform defined the executive. It no longer does.
Well, this is a point worth making, that the platform they'd agree on at the Labor conference would have to be taken forward by the parliamentary team, by the caucus, and enacted as policy. That is no longer the case. So what's the point for the rank and file to bother coming here?
I think well, I think you do have to scratch your head, and I think that is a debate that they do have to have. I mean, this is a massive exercise, 400 delegates from around the country. It is a show of inclusiveness. It is showing that it's still a democratic party, that it has a unique or novel form of decision-making, but in fact, does it have that still unique form of decision-making? I don't know, David.
Because you don't also see around the corridors here a lot of the rank and file getting that much access to have a chat with the senior ministers, and particularly not Kevin Rudd, who hasn't been here a lot of these last 3 days.
He's barely been here.
And for good reason. He was at a funeral and a memorial service, but it's not like we've seen him mixing it with the rank and file.
No, and most of the other ministers have been up an escalator, separated from the rank and file, hobnobbing with the business delegates who paid $7,500.
So there is the fundraising element of this
conference.
there's
a big fundraising element, although some were at pains to say that it's not like the past because there wasn't a huge hoopla gala dinner, which is usually a fundraiser also, but nevertheless, just on conservative estimates, they would have pulled in about $1.5 million from the business community for the observers here. And, that's not small for a change. But where's the priorities and importance here, I guess, is what a lot of people have been asking over the last couple of days.
Yeah, there was, I was saying earlier, probably the biggest division, even though they sorted this one out as well, was the gay marriage division. There were some negotiations that went very late last night, continued very early this morning, and finally they reached a compromise, which in the end, do you think have achieved any progress on this issue of gay marriage? It doesn't sound like there's any real movement at all from Labor.
But there never was going to be any recognition in the platform or by the party federally, by the parliamentary party, that gay marriage was something that they would countenance or take forward in terms of any sort of, in terms of political will. It is something that the Prime Minister has said constantly, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and even if they stuff about a little with the wording in the platform, that, it doesn't mean much, really.
Carrie-Anne Walsh, thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all for this edition of PM Agenda, and for our coverage of the ALP conference here at Sydney's Darling Harbour. I hope you've enjoyed, or at least felt a bit more informed about what's going on in the Labor movement over these last few days. For now, I'm David Speers. Thanks for your company.